Eat human.
Les humains à leur meilleur.
C'est tu apogeo.
ピーク人間
Our first guest is the great Dr. Ted Nyman. Maybe you know who that is, maybe you don't, but I'll just say, listen to the man. Some of this may be new to people who aren't total nutrition nerds, but just know it's the truth. Dr. Nyman might be the most on-point authority on how your metabolism works, how to stay lean and fit, and how to eat optimally. He has a ton of experience with thousands of patients and sees firsthand how different diets affect all different kinds of people. I've learned so much from him, and a lot of things clicked into place once I started really understanding his way of thinking about nutrition. So before we start, just remember that we're trying to break even on all of this by crowdfunding to get the film made. Please pre-order it now on Indiegogo. Just search for Food Lies or click through from the show notes. Thanks. All right, Ted Nyman, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, wow, man. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, great. Well, let's not bury the lead here. You're in the trenches here. You're a doctor. What do you do on a daily basis? Let's just let you talk.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I'm a family practice doctor. I do primary care medicine, and I have been out of school for the past 20 years. So I see, maybe 100 patients a week, 50 weeks a year for 20 years. We're talking about 100,000 patient encounters. And the entire time I've been focused on diet and lifestyle and health. And so I'm just really, really interested in this. And this is really my passion and my job all kind of rolled up together.
Awesome. Usually I don't think it's super necessary to hear someone's life story, but in your case, I think it's kind of relevant. So how did you get started? What's your backstory?
My backstory. Well, I got an engineering degree to start out, mechanical engineering, and then I really couldn't get a job.
So did I.
Oh, awesome.
Shout out.
So mechanical engineering is very cool. And, but I went to school out here in the Pacific Northwest, and there were a lot of Boeing layoffs, and I couldn't really get a job. And so I was a little depressed about that, and I decided I would just go to medical school kind of on a whim. And, I think on the very last day you could possibly apply, I applied to medical school and got in and just found myself going down this medical path. This wasn't really my big plan, you know what I mean? And my background is that I was told that diet was very important, and I was raised predominantly vegetarian, and I had sort of an Adventist vegetarian background. And I found that my health was not that great. My diet was extremely healthy on paper. We're talking whole grains and no saturated fat and just plenty of fruits and vegetables. And you would think that I would have perfect health because of this quote unquote perfect diet on paper. But I really found that my health was not any better than anyone else's, maybe worse. And I was left with the impression that diet just really didn't matter. It was mostly genetics. And that's in fact what I was taught in medical school. It's like anytime a patient had a bad outcome, the driving force there was genetics. Oh, you had to feel sorry for this patient because, both their parents were overweight, so they're going to be overweight. It's genetic. Or you have a parent with diabetes. Well, you're going to get diabetes. It's genetic. And then I have, ingrained in my psyche the concept that diet doesn't really matter and it's mostly genetic. And this was supported by my medical school training as well, where we didn't focus at all on diet. And instead, we did talk about the genetic predisposition to all of these chronic diseases. So I'm blissfully going through internship and residency with these kind of concepts in mind until one day, one of my diabetics showed up, and he had radically dropped his blood sugar and lost 30 pounds, and he felt great. And I was really impressed because all my other diabetics just kept getting worse and worse. That was just how it went. And, diabetes is a chronic progressive disease. So you just, get worse and worse until you die of a complication. But no, this guy had basically reversed his diabetes. And I asked him how he did it. And he just shows me this copy of an old Atkins book. Told me, yeah, I changed my diet. I stopped eating carbohydrates and I lost 30 pounds and my blood sugar is normal and I feel great. And I just couldn't believe it. That really blew my mind. Like I never, ever, ever realized that one little diet change like that could make such a transformation in somebody's health. And that really stuck with me. And during my residency, I was required to research some sort of topic and write a paper on it, some sort of research activity. And I ended up researching anything I could find on macronutrients and health outcomes. And after years of research, I came to this realization that, wow, everybody's eating probably more carbohydrates than they should. And honestly, I've been utilizing low carbohydrate diets in my practice for the past 20 years ever since.
Wow, that's awesome. So in your opinion, what are humans supposed to eat? Or what's the optimal way to eat?
Well, okay, I've been researching ancestral diets and evolutionary diets and what humans are supposed to eat. And I'm absolutely convinced that nobody's eating enough protein and everybody's eating too much carbohydrate. So if you look at estimations of worldwide hunter-gatherer diets, everybody's eating 20 to 35% protein. Basically 20% is a bare minimum. But if you look at the average protein intake on the planet at the moment, it's down at around 14 or 15%. And then in the US over the past 50 or 60 years, we diluted our protein down to about 12.5%. If you look at the sort of U-shaped curve for weight gain efficiency and protein percent in humans, it's really at about 12.5%. So we've pretty much landed at the optimum fattening protein percentage that you could possibly get. If you go lower in protein, you actually get thinner. And if you go higher in protein, you get thinner. We've somehow found the recipe for maximum fattening, which is getting at least half your calories from carbs and keeping protein fairly low at, around 10, 12%.
That's really tragic that we landed on that sort of accidentally. So
it's very tragic.
Well, so I want to get into protein a lot more, but just before that, what specifically, like what types of foods, maybe just to make it simple, the overview of like what foods do you eat and what do you think are the most healthy foods?
Gotcha. Okay. So humans are basically hunter-gatherers, and we probably evolved from frugivores, primates eating low sugar fruits. And then we developed the ability to make tools and to throw weapons and to cook with fire. And we traded off a lot of our GI tract for larger brains and the ability to throw weapons and the ability to process and cook food with knives and with fire. And so we sort of turned into this hunter-gatherer that excels at throwing weapons and performing distance running. So we're persistence hunters. We can outrun any, in terms of distance, any animal on the planet. So we can run down these herds of grazing quadrupeds, and we're good at we can outthrow any organism on the planet. So we basically throw weapons with incredible accuracy. We make tools, we make weapons, we throw them, we hunt down grazing quadrupeds, herbivores, and then we process them with tools and with fire. And as a result, we get this incredibly high nutrient density diet that supports our ginormous brains and our nutrient requirements without having to have a huge fermentation vat or whatever in our guts. So we basically excel at hunting and gathering these nutrient dense foods. And it's basically meat. And then I think we are also definitely designed to eat low sugar fruits and small underground plant storage organs like tubers. So I think probably the ideal Homo sapien diet is basically meat, which is specifically processed and cooked. So we're definitely organisms that have evolved to eat cooked food because the nutrient extraction is higher. And then we eat opportunistically things like low sugar fruits and small plant underground storage organs like tubers. So for a Homo sapien diet, I really like meat, basically animals nose to tail, especially quadruped, grazing ruminant herbivores. I like low sugar fruit. I like small tubers. I think this is really the sweet spot for Homo sapiens. And I really think that, I know we're all individual, delicate snowflakes, and everyone's supposed to have a special diet that's genetically predetermined, for their unique genetic fingerprint. But honestly, somewhere out there is some sort of intergalactic zoo where somebody's kidnapped a bunch of Homo sapiens and has them on display. And they basically feed these things just cooked quadruped ruminant herbivores and some low sugar fruits and some small tubers. And those people are healthy and lean as hell. You know what I mean? These are extremely healthy Homo sapiens. So I think there's this basic recipe that you could feed any Homo sapien, and they're basically going to hit their optimum functioning.
Yeah, and it would make sense that this is how we ate for most of human history. So why would it be much different now?
Exactly.
And also, a lot of scientists think that that's how cooking food and eating meat is how we became human, how we doubled our brain size and all that kind of thing, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. We went through these twin epochs of first eating flesh, like basically eating other organisms, nose to tail, and then fire, cooking with fire. And the result of these two just upped their nutrient extraction like crazy. And that's why we can eat so little, yet have such huge brains. I mean, we've really leveraged that throughout our evolution.
Yeah. And I'll also go back to explain what low sugar fruits are, because I don't think, normally people don't exactly know what that means.
Right. Okay. So botanically, a fruit would be, an olive, an avocado, pumpkin, a zucchini, a squash, an eggplant, a tomato. So like small versions of these fruits were probably, available to us because it's sort of a win-win between the plant and the animal kingdom. The plant wants you to eat these fruits and then throw away the seeds or poop the seeds out somewhere else to help it propagate. And this is really good symbiosis between plants and animals. And I'm quite sure the hunter-gatherers took advantage of this every opportunity that they got. And this is probably perfectly reasonable thing for Homo sapiens to eat. Now, of course, today we have bred all our cultivated grocery store fruits to have like an obscene amount of sugar in it. So now a grocery store banana has 29 grams of sugar in it, and it's so high in sugar that you cannot feed it to a zoo primate, which will get dental disease or diabetes. And, zoo primates are expensive, so we're not going to feed them something that high in sugar. And it's basically the fact that we've cultivated all these things to maximize energy yield and sugar yield. And in the process of maximizing the energy yield, you dilute out the protein, the fiber, and the micronutrients like minerals. So we see protein and mineral dilution and all this energy to the point that it's more energy than people need.
Yeah. And you mentioned nutrient density. I love that line of thinking on how we should eat. So, what are the more nutrient dense foods?
Well, they're basically animal products. I mean, your most nutrient dense foods on earth are anytime you're eating an entire animal nose to tail. So an egg is literally everything you need to make a chicken, and the nutritional density is insanely high. Anytime you're eating a whole organism, you're getting a ridiculously high nutrient density. That would be, shellfish like mussels and clams and oysters. That would be small fish that you would eat in their entirety. Anytime you're eating something nose to tail, you're basically eating literally everything you need to create and sustain life. So that's your very highest nutrient density of all.
Yeah, like organ meats that we don't really eat anymore. But if you ate chicken liver or beef liver, it would be very nutritious.
Exactly.
And then also, so you didn't really mention oily fish, but sardines are great, especially because you can eat them whole, and salmon, the whole omega-3s and salmon and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously our omega-6 to omega-3 ratio currently is pretty terrible. And so anytime you can increase your omega-3 intake, that's probably good. So yes, I do like sardines and oily fish and salmon. I think those are great foods to be eating.
Okay. So all the foods you mentioned are non-starchy, non-sugary foods. So can you talk about insulin and how that works in our body and insulin resistance?
Well, okay. So insulin resistance is really honestly just running out of room to store fat in your fat cells. If you overexpand your fat cells and you're unable for some genetic reason to sprout new fat cells, once your fat cells are full in your subcutaneous fat, fat gets stored in your visceral fat, and then you get ectopic fat, and then you have fat circulating in your bloodstream, and there's basically nowhere for this fat to go. So your insulin's high 24/7. Your body's trying to shove fat into all these cells that don't want it. They're refusing fat. They're also refusing glucose. So insulin resistance is literally just filling up your fat cells, and you literally filled up your fat cells because you consumed too much energy, either carbs or fats, and you consumed too much energy because you diluted out the protein and micronutrients in your diet.
Okay, yeah. So basically, it's from too much fat and or sugar, or both. The combination is the bad thing. You can eat. This is something I didn't really understand until semi-recently, that no one's really talking about, is that you can actually have a very low-fat diet and still be reasonably okay. And you can have a really high-fat diet and be okay, as long as you're not doing both. Is that kind of right?
That's kind of correct. So if you take the standard American diet and then you suddenly make it low carb, what you've done is dramatically improved the protein to energy ratio and the micronutrient to energy ratio. You've cut out a bunch of carbohydrates, digestible carbohydrates that just turn into glucose, which is really just pure energy. You've cut out all this energy, and now your protein and micronutrient to energy ratio is higher, and you automatically get more satiety. And you're automatically not going to consume as much energy and have to store it. Honestly, the same thing happens with fat. If you eat less fat, you're going to automatically increase your protein to energy and micronutrient to energy ratio. And the same sort of thing is going to happen. Now, some fats are essential, and most fats come along packaged with protein. So for that reason, I think it's easier to go low carb than low fat if you're targeting protein and micronutrients. And that's the main reason that I prefer a low carb approach. Plus the fact that if you have someone who's a type 1 or type 2 diabetic like myself, who is dealing with some extreme glucose roller coasters, the minute they go on a low carb diet, their blood sugar issues are just radically improved. And so low carb is really, in my opinion, preferable to low fat.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't really understand how vegans were kind of pulling it off. But once I realized there's sort of a different metabolic state, that if you just had very low fat, that it could kind of work. But the problem is you run into different problems, and it's really hard to pull off, I think, to do that really low fat diet and do it correctly. Because yes, you do need some essential fats. And people like to have food that tastes good. And if you're going to maybe be a hardcore vegan and you're super into it and you're very like moral, and I'm never going to eat meat, and I'm going to eat 80% carbs and 10% fat and 10% protein, or some really hard to maintain diet, you can do okay for a while, but it doesn't seem ideal. So I feel like there's more problems when you try to go low fat, and it's a lot easier. You have less problems, and it's more efficient in many ways to just embrace fat and protein and go the low carb route.
Yeah, I mean, I do think you can pull it off as a vegan. I have patients who are vegans who are completely pulling it off, and they are very, very careful, and they're usually supplementing. They're frequently using protein supplements like, rice protein, hemp protein, pea protein. They're frequently taking, B12 and other supplements, and they're usually ditching all the refined carbs like sugar and flour. So if you eat green vegetables and you subtract fiber from them and just look at digestible carbs, this is actually a low fat and a low carb approach, and you are actually getting a very high protein to energy ratio. Like technically, if you took a food like broccoli and subtracted out the fiber, so you were just looking at digestible carbs, the protein to energy ratio in that is really, really high. It's similar to meat. It's just unfortunately a ridiculously tiny amount of protein, so you don't end up getting very much protein. Now, protein is this U-shaped curve where at very, very low proteins, you actually get extremely thin. If you can get your protein down to about 5%, which is kind of what people are doing with like the potato hack. If all you do is eat russet potatoes, you're going to get about 5% protein, and you'll actually get fairly lean because you're tapping into this low protein phenomenon where if your body detects that your protein intake is super low, it'll actually start shedding a bunch of energy and the cost of weight gain goes up exponentially. So you're actually shedding tons of energy and you can lose weight doing this. The problem is when you eat low protein, you start getting low lean mass, which means sarcopenia, low muscle mass, osteopenia, low bone mass. You also get low vital mass, which is literally the weight of all your organs. So your heart and your brain will literally be smaller and weigh less and literally shrink. So the low protein vegan route, you can completely pull it off, but you can expect your lean mass to probably be lower than you want it to be. You know what I mean? I don't think that's optimal. I also see vegans eating probably what I would consider to be too many carbs from a dental health point of view. You know what I mean? I really think that most societies, if you look at the historical evidence, when societies start eating starch, they usually have more dental disease as a result. And so I'm not sure that that's really optimum just from that standpoint.
Yeah, that's the whole Weston A. Price thing that he found out in
Correct.
the 1930s.
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, it doesn't sound like a great way to go at all to do this high carb route. So why is fat the preferred fuel source?
Well, okay.
You kind of skipped over a little bit, but people don't really know, the general public, that your body can run on fat or sugar.
So your body is actually battery powered. You are a battery powered machine, and you have a chemical battery, which is basically stored saturated body fat. So you're only supposed to be eating maybe 10% of your existence or 5% or 1%. And the rest of the time, you're supposed to be running off of stored body fat. So your body has to be tuned for what it's doing most of the time, which is literally just running almost all your metabolism off of stored body fat and really just only using glucose when your maximum energy output needs go up to 80, 90, 100%, like you're sprinting from a saber-toothed tiger or something. So your body's tuned to just run off of saturated fat all the time. And then you use glucose for emergencies. So when you overload your body with glucose all day, every day, you're kind of forcing yourself to be in this fed state nonstop. So you actually downregulate your ability to just run your mitochondria off of saturated fat, which is what they're designed to do. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So you can actually get away with eating a bunch of carbs if you just eat once a day. You know what I'm saying? So there are these, you'll find these people on Instagram and on YouTube who just eat one meal a day and they just eat, all sorts of abject garbage. But then the whole rest of the day, they're exercising and running off of stored body fat. And you can actually kind of get away with this. I'm not recommending this, but this one meal a day and this intermittent fasting is a hack to retain your ability to mostly run off of saturated fat, stored body fat, but still eat crap just to refill your fat cells once a day. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I kind of stumbled into that way of doing things before years ago when I didn't even know what I was doing. And I was like, oh, wait, this works. I can eat trash, but I'm not eating only one big meal and maybe a small meal later. And yeah, so tell me, what is it intermittent fasting is, or like restricted eating window?
Right. So time restricted eating is basically shrinking down the period of the day during which you're eating, which honestly probably more closely resembles what humans would actually do. Looking at it through an evolutionary lens, we would hunt and gather. You're basically running off of stored body fat most of the time. And then you get a whole bunch of food together and you cook it and you eat it. And then you rest and digest. And then it all starts all over again. So what's not really evolutionary appropriate, I don't think, is to just eat all day long. Like roll out of bed, immediately eat something. Just have food right there and eat it. And then have a snack and then eat again. And then make yourself eat 3 times a day to the clock on a schedule. We've just really exploded the amount of times a day that we're eating with all of our snacking, driven by the snack food industry, of course, because, the more you eat, the happier they are. And it's really, really advantageous to roll that back. And we have all kinds of studies now on time-restricted eating. You can take any overweight or diabetic dog, cat, rat, mouse, or human, shrink their access to food from 24 hours a day down to, say, 8 hours a day, and they will immediately lose weight, lower body fat, lower blood sugar, reverse insulin resistance. It's fairly magical, and I am a huge fan of time-restricted eating. I personally do a 16-8 every day, this sort of lean gains protocol where I skip breakfast and then just eat lunch and dinner in an 8-hour window. And I think that's a really great hack for a lot of people.
Yeah, I do the exact same thing and I feel amazing and I've never been in better shape. It's a great thing. But the best way to do it is don't rely on that and eat a bunch of trash and then try to get away with it. It's just eat healthy, good foods during that 8 hours.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Although it's important to know that you actually can get away with eating more abject garbage if you're just eating one meal a day. It's very interesting and it's good to know. Yeah.
Well, I kind of utilize that on the weekends if I want to go to a barbecue and stuff my face and be like a kid at a birthday party. It's good to do once in a while.
Yeah, I think that, if you're lean and you're healthy and you have plenty of headroom in your adipocytes and you're mostly running off of fat, so you're pretty good at doing that and you're really in touch with hunger and satiety, I think that people can get away with these cheats, especially if they're doing some intermittent fasting to deplete liver glycogen, doing a lot of exercise to turn over muscle glycogen. I find most people can actually get away with eating a lot of basically trash if they're really, intentional about it and just not eating this all day, every day, all the time.
Yeah, it's definitely more of a treat. And yeah, it's good to be metabolically flexible, I guess you could call it, where I only do it because I've gotten to the point where I can get away with it. Yeah.
Right.
And so I think we a little bit skipped over the fact that anytime you eat, insulin is produced. So all the good things happen when you're not eating, kind of. And so even if you're eating, perfect nutrition, but you ate it every 4 hours throughout 24 hours, you would still have insulin spikes and you would still maybe gain weight. It's more about when you eat it. And if it's a restricted window, it's a different story.
Exactly right. So insulin is basically just signaling the fed state. And I think the secret there is to keep it pulsatile. You just don't want high insulin all the time. You really don't want to eat a handful of Skittles every, 2 minutes for 24 hours. It's probably bad.
And again, with eating fat and protein rich foods instead of carbs, they have a higher satiety factor. So you tend to be full, right? I feel like that's a huge thing that people don't really understand or realize that that's one of the benefits of going low carb.
Absolutely. So protein is the most satiating macronutrient, dramatically more satiating than the others. Fat is second. And carbs are the least satiating, and alcohol literally makes you hungry. I've looked at all these fascinating preload studies. This is where you feed someone a small appetizer, and then 2 hours later they hit the buffet and eat as much as they want, and you just weigh and measure what they eat. And a protein preload, so if I just give you a little appetizer of protein, 2 hours later, you're going to eat way less than if you preload with anything else, fat, carbs, sugar. The worst is a combination of sugar and fat. You eat a mixed sugar and fat preload, and you're going to really eat a ton downstream from that. Alcohol is also very bad. Alcohol is like one of the worst for downstream consumption.
Yeah. Well, maybe there's also a factor of loosening your inhibitions and just wanting to eat anything. But yeah.
Oh, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. So my friend got an email. It seemed to be basically outlining a protein sparing modified fast. It was like a cheat way to lose a lot of weight quickly. I guess it did have the caveat, don't do this long term, but it was basically just like a lot of protein and not a lot else and not as many calories. So what is that?
So a protein sparing modified fast is basically eating protein and some micronutrients and keeping the energy as low as possible. And the idea is you eat the protein and micronutrients to support your lean mass and all your other functions that require micronutrients, but you keep any energy carbs or fat as low as possible. So you have to run your whole metabolism off of stored body fat. This is very painful and it's not fun, but you will lose a ton of weight very rapidly. It's probably the single best way to lose weight rapidly and safely. We do it with bariatric patients all the time, and you can lose a ton of weight in a hurry. It becomes dangerous if you're trying to do this long term if you're really, really thin. So basically, bodybuilders are really trying to shave this down as much as they can. And you'll see bodybuilders, before they get on stage, their protein is extremely high, maybe 200 or 300 grams of protein, but they're very maybe low carb and low fat. They get the energy really, really low. And this is painful and it's not fun. And your body does not like you drawing down your fat reserves this rapidly and this much. So it's usually something that people can only do maybe a week at a time before they have to do some sort of fat or carb refeed a little bit, you know what I mean? And you can't do that indefinitely if you're very lean, because you just literally won't have enough energy and you'll basically starve to death.
Yeah.
Rabbit starvation is something that happens to very lean people.
It sounds like the protein-sparing modified fast is used in extreme cases under doctor supervision. Kind of, is that what happens if you have a bad patient in a metabolic problem and you need to address it quickly, or is that what it's used for?
Yeah, it's basically just a rapid weight loss protocol. It's really mostly used in the bariatric surgery realm. If you watch My 600-Pound Life on TV or something, these people are basically doing protein-sparing modified fasts, which is where you eat pretty much unlimited lean protein like, boneless, skinless chicken breasts and fish, plus unlimited green vegetables like salad type vegetables, and maybe some fish oil capsules and a couple multivitamins. And the idea is to just give yourself all the protein and micronutrients you need, but pretty much no energy. So all the energy to run your body comes from stored body fat. And again, it's super effective, super painful, equal parts awesome and horrible. But the important thing to know is this protein to energy concept is infinitely scalable and anyone can use it to progress their diet. You know what I mean? Like you could just look at the diet you've got and somewhere in there up the protein and micronutrients, mostly minerals, and decrease some sort of luxury energy calories like carbs or fats that you might not necessarily need. And you could probably change your body composition and improve it in the process. You know what I'm saying? So you wouldn't have to necessarily get extreme about it. You could just make some little tweaks. This is something someone could do more gradually too with the same concept. It's like you're just headed towards a protein-sparing modified fast, even if you're not really doing the full-on protein only.
Yeah, I think that's a lot better. And so what do you think about juice fasts? It seems like that's sort of the opposite of what you should do. You're trying to lose weight quickly, so you just get your body addicted to sugar, and then you're in this weird state a week later and you're starving, and then you just want to eat everything in sight. But if you do something more along the lines of just cut down on fat and just get protein, you maintain your lean body mass because you still have enough protein, and then you're set up to be a fat burner at the end of it and not just starving and sugar filled.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with just not eating or just drinking juice, like giving yourself a little bit of glucose, the outcome of all of that type of dieting is the same. You're going to lose equal amounts of fat mass and lean mass. Like it's really 50-50. If you just stop eating or you just eat a couple hundred calories of juice every day, you're going to lose fat mass and lean mass equally. And that is not good. And you're going to be hungry. You're going to lose lean mass. And you might not set your set point lower. You know what I mean? You might regain all your fat and maybe or maybe not regain your lean mass. And you probably haven't reset your body's set point, this sort of weight that your body wants you to be at.
Yeah, maybe just talk about that for another second. People think you can go on these crash diets, but then they end up just gaining their weight back because your body naturally wants to go to its set point. Right.
So the secret there, well, first of all, your whole goal is to get the highest lean mass and the lowest fat mass that you possibly can, because then you're going to be the most insulin sensitive and you're going to have the most metabolic flexibility. And this is kind of the ultimate goal, right? Highest lean mass, lowest fat mass. And the way you achieve that is make sure you're eating plenty of protein and minerals and micronutrients so you have everything you need for lean mass, and then just eating less energy. And so when people go on these diets where they cut down all the macros together, if you're just like, okay, I'm going to keep eating cheeseburgers and fries, just less of it. Well, now you've gone from your protein was probably too low to begin with to your protein's really too low to begin with. And now your body's pissed and you're going to lose lean mass, and you're probably going to regain all your weight when you're done eating that way because you're going to be starving.
All right, so we've danced around this a little bit, but I kind of talk about protein leverage hypothesis a lot, especially with my sister. She is learning about this, and she thinks she's having the healthiest meal of all time by eating a giant bowl of broccoli, and that's it. And then, 2 hours later, she's out, and now she's buying some bad food and spending money that she didn't even want to spend, and backfiring the whole plan in the first place just because she's hungry. So how does the protein leverage hypothesis work?
Well, the problem with broccoli is that you really have to eat your entire body weight in broccoli to get enough, meaningful protein out of it. I think anyone's going to be hungry after they eat broccoli. And then if you're some sort of very low fat, very low protein, sarcopenic, osteopenic vegan, well, then you just fill in with starch, basically glucose calories. And that's probably not optimum for body composition. So yeah, broccoli is problematic. I just don't see people getting enough meaningful protein out of it unless they eat absurd quantities.
But so specifically, your body eats until it gets enough protein. That's kind of what that whole thing's about.
Right.
Yeah, your body.
Exactly. Well, you'll eat more in an attempt to get higher absolute proteins. Let's put it that way. So you can eat only 5 or 10% protein, but you're going to eat twice as much. Like we did a study in protein leverage where we randomized people to eat 5%, 15%, or 30% protein, and people ate ad lib. And the 5% people ate almost twice as much energy as the 30% protein people. And they still had a low absolute amount of protein. So they were still not getting, quote unquote, enough protein, probably not enough protein to support a high amount of lean mass. But they did eventually stop eating, albeit at twice the energy of the 30% people.
Yeah. And ad lib means they ate at their own discretion. They didn't have to cap their eating.
Right.
Okay, so you're obviously a fan of eating protein. So there's all these sort of macro wars, and everyone's saying we're all fat because there's too much fat in the diet or there's too much carbs in the diet. What do you think about this? I think I've heard you talk about this before, what the real problem might be.
So if you go back and look at the obesity graph, right? We've all seen the obesity graph. Somewhere in the 70s, it took this sharp uptick and then just took off, and it's been climbing ever since. And if you look at macros back then and exactly what happened, carbs and fats went up dramatically in the 70s, and protein, absolute protein, stayed exactly the same. And what this represented was protein dilution. We dumped a bunch of sugar, flour, and oil into the food supply, pretty much equal carbs and fats, but all just empty calories. So we literally had to eat more to get the same amount of protein because we're going to try to conserve the absolute amount of protein we eat. And that, honestly, if you run the numbers, that really could explain the entire obesity epidemic. And it was basically turning to bulk refining and transportation of sugar, flour, and oil. All of a sudden, every grocery store in the country had all these processed foods that had a lot of protein dilution with sugar, flour, and oil because these foods are cheap and they have really long shelf life and they're a lot more portable and they were convenient, and everyone just started eating this stuff, and the rest is history.
Yeah, the problem is the combination of the carbs and the fats. Protein's not exactly the problem. Some people think that too much protein is a problem because gluconeogenesis, you're going to start turning that into glucose.
So I used to think that if you ate too much protein, you'd convert half of it into glucose and it would be detrimental somehow. And I've done a lot of research into this, and I've pulled every study I can get my hands on, and I've realized that that's basically a giant load of crap. Like, I have study after study of people eating protein and then tracking glucose afterwards. And it really doesn't go up unless you're a type 1 diabetic with absolutely no insulin. And then you will see increases in blood sugar, even then, not so much from gluconeogenesis, but rather from glycogen release from the liver. This whole gluconeogenesis thing is really kind of overblown and kind of ridiculous. And most people can eat a ton of protein without converting much of it into glucose. Your body just deaminates it, and then you oxidize the carbon skeletons in your mitochondria just like you would anything else. The reality is, if you take someone who's type 2 diabetic and feed them more protein, their blood sugar actually goes down, and their 24-hour glucose area goes down about 40% if you double their protein intake. So honestly, eating more protein for a diabetic will lower their overall blood sugar. And for a normal subject eating protein, even a ton of protein, their blood sugar doesn't go up at all. I have studies where people ate 2 pounds of meat and then watched their blood sugar over the next 6 hours, and it didn't go up at all, like none, like zero. The gluconeogenesis is almost... Well, of course it's happening, but the idea that if you eat too much protein, you'll spike your blood sugar is just purely mythical. This is just not really true.
Interesting. Yeah, it seems like one of those things that vegans like to throw around. I try to look at all different sides of this. They like to throw around a lot of stuff. They try to poke holes. Actually learning about this thing that you're talking about, that you can actually do okay on high carb and low fat, it makes me wonder why there's such a war between vegans and, say, the paleo people. I mean, I guess there's the ideology war, but I mean, I don't understand why people can't realize that there's two ways. There's kind of two metabolic states that can work. Everyone's throwing science and all this stuff at each other and saying that the other person is wrong when both can be right.
Well, honestly, one of the reasons I love the protein to energy concept is that it really turns low fat people and low carb people into two sides of the same coin, because both approaches are equally improving protein and micronutrient to energy ratios. And both approaches are equally reversing the protein dilution that we've been doing for the past 50 or 60 years. So when I do see this carb versus fat quarrel, I'm like, wow, maybe we should be looking more at protein here. I feel that that's kind of the sort of the secret. This is why you see so much success on both sides. Like, there's so many people who've been successful with low fat and so many with low carb. Honestly, both of these camps have a problem. The low fat vegan people really need to explain all of we low carbers who are in fantastic shape with perfect labs. I mean, they've got some black swans on their hand. Yeah. But it's the same thing. It's the same thing in reverse in the low carb camp. We really haven't explained away some low-fat people who are in fantastic, perfect shape, and everything's going great for them. You know what I mean? And we really, until we can explain that, our theories are basically crap. The carbohydrate insulin theory is really kind of broken at this point. We really need to explain these paradoxes, and we haven't properly explained them. I mean, I think I actually have with this protein to energy concept, and that's kind of why I'm sticking with it. But low carb has a problem.
Well, I think low fat has a bigger problem because but multiple reasons, and also just evolutionarily, it makes a lot more sense.
Oh, yeah. Well, even from just a dental health point of view, low carb is way smarter. So I'm going to stick with the low carb camp. And there's a reason why I'm low carb myself. I think it's superior. But I do think that low carb has to explain some of the people we're seeing eating high carbohydrate diets and seemingly in perfect health.
Yeah. Well, I guess maybe some studies will figure that out soon enough. All right, I don't want to keep you too much longer. So yeah, you are low carb yourself. And if anyone doesn't know, he's ripped. Ted's a beast. How do you work out?
So I'm a body weight guy. I've basically never touched a barbell. I don't use weights. I don't use barbells. It's all body weight. And my routine is so simple that everyone would probably just die if they knew exactly how extremely lame and basic it is. I mean, for years and years and years, I've mostly just done push-ups and pull-ups and squats and like body weight squats, and that's it. I mean, it's so so basic and so simple.
That's unbelievable. Just look him up on Twitter at Ted Nyman. So how do you do that though? How long? How many reps? How's it work?
So pretty much for about a decade, I've done bodyweight exercises either every other day or 3 times a week or daily, so basically somewhere between daily to every other day. And these are very brief workouts. They're about 15 minutes. And I will just do anywhere from 1 to 3 sets of a move to failure. And it's usually a basic pushing move, such as dips, push-ups, handstand push-ups, and then a basic pulling move, really only just pull-ups. That's all I've done. I don't really do rows or anything else. So it's one pulling move, pull-ups. It's several different pushing moves, could be dips, push-ups, or handstand push-ups. And then it's really just lunges or pistol squats for the legs, single leg exercises. And I do these to failure. And the secret is just consistency and intensity. So the workout's super brief, but I just go all the way to failure and beyond. I really try to signal to the muscle that it's just inadequate the way it is. And then I just do that over, every day, every other day, somewhere in there, just for years. And you can really, really get to where you want to be with this ultra simple program. You know what I mean? I'm not doing any periodization or muscle confusion or using equipment or paying for gyms. I mean, it's so damn simple. I mean, it's so basic. It's just embarrassing.
Yeah, I couldn't really believe it until I kind of started doing it, and I've done it more and more, and I'm seeing the results. People don't believe you when you say, oh yeah, I mean, I only worked out for like 15, 20 minutes. Like, no, that's not real. But so how does it work exactly? Like the important part is going to failure. So what's going on with the muscles? Right.
So if you're doing submaximal stuff, your muscle is never going to improve, right? If you just decided, okay, I'm going to walk for 6 hours a day, every day for the rest of my life, you'll never add muscle. You'll never get stronger. You'll never get better. You know what I mean? You'll get more efficient at walking, and that's it. But if you just sprint as hard as you can for 30 seconds every day, and you go to absolute failure where you're like, I'm sprinting for my life here. Wow. Well, you send this huge message to your muscle that it's completely inadequate the way it is. And if it doesn't allow you to sprint faster next time, you're literally going to die. Once you send this signal to your muscle over the next few days, you actually gain muscle. You literally get more muscle mitochondria, and you get more sarcoplasma, and you literally add muscle after doing this. And the next time you sprint, you are literally slightly stronger and faster and better. And that's the secret of high intensity training. You're telling your body it has to be better. You're making it improve because of this huge demand you put on it. It's really like energy output demand. You demand this huge energy output from your muscles. And your muscle, it's like your cell phone battery. And if you drained it all the way down, and your cell phone said, wow, I really didn't like that feeling. Next time I'm going to give this guy 5 or 10% more battery power. That's kind of what your muscle's doing. You know what I mean? It's trying to keep you alive, and it's trying to keep up with the demand you're putting on it.
Yeah. So it sounds like that also makes sense in an evolutionary lens.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think almost everything, if you just look at an evolutionary approach, you can kind of tease out what makes sense and what doesn't just based on that.
Yeah, I love to look at everything through this evolutionary lens. Absolutely.
Yeah. It also jives with no pain, no gain. The classic thing is you can't just lollygag around and, do like a few curls with a 10-pounder. You have to actually push yourself, and that's what's actually giving you the gain.
Exactly.
Okay, awesome. All right, so Ted, thank you so much for giving us all this info, and also thank you for doing it on Twitter. And I suggest everyone go to his site, burnfatnotsugar.com, and at Ted Nyman at Twitter. That's TEDNAIMAN. You do awesome work on Twitter just for free. I feel like you don't gain anything from this other than helping people. A lot of people, are trying to sell stuff on Twitter or promote, but I mean, you're just like family practice doctor.
Yeah, I haven't monetized any of this at all, really. I'm just, trying to help people out, really.
Well, that means that you have no reason not to check his stuff out and listen to him because there's no real gain. You're not making any money, so you have no reason to tell people the wrong info. So
that's right.
All right. Thanks so much. And I look forward to interviewing for the film.
Sounds good.
Okay. I'll see you in Seattle.
All right.
Thanks so much for listening. Please support the Food Lies film on Indiegogo so you can see this handsome man drop some knowledge on us on the big screen. We just passed $10,000, which is amazing, but only 1/6 of the way to our goal. Thanks to all the contributors so far, and thank you in advance to anyone supporting the film in any way, even if it's just telling a friend. See you next time.